Hello, everyone. My name is Oksana Klimenko. I'm postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Ukrainian and Canadian Studies at the University of Manitoba. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of Anishinabek, Ininavuk, Anisinavuk, Dakota, Oyate, Denisoline, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today we'll continue our Cook's lecture series, and I'm glad to introduce our speaker, Natalie Kononenko. She was a professor at the University of Manitoba. Earlier, she taught at the University of Virginia. She conducted field works in Canada, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. Her book, Ukrainian Ritual on the Prairies, Growing an Ukrainian Canadian Identity, received the Canadian Association of Slavists prize and the prize from the Canadian Historical Association. So thank you so much for joining this today event, and now we'll be able to listen to this.
So this is the title.
Lecture.
I was asked to talk about Easter, paska, and Provody on the Canadian Prairies. And actually, there's a big section in my most recent book, the one that Oksana mentioned. And it is about the Canadian prairies. And I'll be telling you about the work we did. I spent 10 years out on the Canadian prairies. Every year, I'd say goodbye to my husband for a month, and we would take off and go around the prairies. And my job in this, as I will again mention later on in the slideshow, my job was to interview people. And I interviewed lots of people. We ended up with 250 hours worth of recordings. These are available at the University of Virginia, University of Alberta website. If you want the link, I can share the link at the end of this presentation. People have done things like found their Dido's interview agreement with me and said, "Did you interview Dido?" "Yes, I interviewed Dido." "Do you want to hear Dido?" And then I would show them where to find the recording. And oh, my Dido, my Dido. And I don't know what Dido was talking about, but this person obviously did. And yes. So if you are interested in listening to those recordings, they're about 250 hours. My husband says, yes, they're 250 hours. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the things that's really important for any work with the prairies is to know what the prairies are like. There are all sorts of jokes like, how do you see Saskatchewan? And the answer is stand on a chair. It is huge. It is flat. There are 1,279,000 people in Saskatchewan, and it's about the size of England. So they're vast expanses of land. As Oksana pointed out, this is the land of Indigenous peoples. But from the point of view of the Canadian government, those peoples weren't there because they didn't tame the land. They didn't build houses on the land the way an English government thought that they should. So they brought in Ukrainians to settle this land, starting in the late 19th century. They kept coming until the First World War. My immigration stopped with the First World War and then resumed between the First and Second. After the Second World War, the type of people that came from Ukraine to Canada were people like me. They're not a farmer. My granddad was a university professor, so my dad never quite got that far because of what happened with the war. And subsequent migrations were also urban. I think one of the weirdest things to me is that in North Battleford, which is a place in Saskatchewan, A lot of people ended up in North Battleford because they were pipe fitters. Anyway, what I'm talking about is those first two migrations and their descendants. A lot of them, well, they were pretty well all English speakers, and I can talk about the problems that they have, like with the contemporary clergy coming in who does not speak English. But one of the things that I want to emphasize here, and I said this to my team when we were practicing, the fact that there were indigenous peoples on the prairies was absolutely vital to Canadian survival. You know, this was not only was it an empty land, it was an unfamiliar land. And indigenous people, bless their hearts, uh, helped them figure out what was going on and what to do. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the things, Ukrainians were quite religious, and one of the things that they did right from the beginning was build churches. On the left is something called the Pilipi Church, built by the people, by the Pilipi family. It has, since the time I took that picture, collapsed. And something that will be important later in this presentation is that even as the church has collapsed, Mr. Polipio, I don't know which number descendant he is of the original Polipios, is still trying to keep the cemetery up. There's something called sloughs in Saskatchewan, which is water that moves about, and he's trying to keep it from moving into the cemetery. The church in the Moline Church near Rycroft, which is in Alberta, is now a historical monument. Next slide, please. Next slide. May I have the next slide, please? I don't remember what it is. I think it's some of the big, huge, big churches that were built on the prairies. Can we have the next slide? Okay, no, the churches were not just religious institutions, they were incredibly important because when the English government, well, English language government, there was a government of Canada, but it was under England, brought in people to settle the prairies. They wanted them not to be Ukrainians, they wanted them to be anglicized. So they took people like Lisa, who was on the left. She later won the Order of Canada, which she's holding in that slide. They changed her name to Elsie because they said Lisa's not a name. On the other, in the picture on the right, there's a guy called Norman Harris and some other people from the church in Endeavour, Saskatchewan. And Norman Harris, before he was Norman Harris, was by his Ukrainian name Nazari Haras. Next slide, please. Yeah, considering how empty this place is, what the Ukrainians accomplished was absolutely incredible. I just will go fairly quickly through a couple of my pictures of these enormous, gorgeous churches. This is Plain Lake, Alberta Catholic Church. Next slide. And this is a picture of an Orthodox church from Saskatchewan. I mean, look at these things. You know, people in this like vast wilderness. People have often said about the prairies, you're driving along and then this enormous, huge church in the middle of nowhere. Next slide, please. Okay, so but what's happening now is that these huge churches, the one on the left is Meath Park, the one on the right is Plainview, to which I will go back in a little bit, are being abandoned and closing. The reasons are one, demographic change. the children of prairie farmers decided they did not want to be prairie farmers. Well, not all of them. Some of them at least decided they didn't want to be prairie farmers. So they moved to urban centers. One thing that allows them to do this was mechanization. So a guy I'll show at the very end says, oh, I buy a tractor, I buy a computer, I program my computer, and off the tractor goes and it, does its thing. So he really doesn't need that much help. What nobody has written about, and what really freaked me out driving across the prairies, was that large corporations, including the Canadian Pension Fund, drive out small farmers because they buy just like huge tracts of prairie land. It's apparently very, very profitable. The first time I saw this was that, I'll go back to the cemetery stuff in a minute. The first time I saw one of these machines that were, I don't know what, 50 feet, with the thing that it's pulling is 50 feet wide at least. And I'm not a prairie girl. I was driving along saying, what is this thing going down the field? And that's what these corporations are like. They're huge. And they buy up land and they drive out the small Ukrainian farmers. So people have told me, the Ukrainians say, I can't afford to buy the land. All these huge corporations have bought it up. So like if the son of a prairie farmer wants to buy another tract to be a prairie farmer, tough luck. So it's, and of course you can see why when the churches are closing. There's not enough people to sustain this. The people that come in with the corporations do not have the settled roots that makes them want. They come in, they plow, they leave. They come in, they harvest, they leave. They don't stay there. They don't have an incentive to invest in the land the way the Ukrainian farmers did. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we did, and this is John Paul Himka, his daughter Eva, Francis Swadepa, and I, we started something called the Sanctuary Project. And on the Sanctuary Project, Francis was the archivist. She'd look stuff up and tell us where to go. Eva Henko would call people up and arrange for us to meet people in the various churches. John Paul did a lot of photography. He's also an icon specialist. And I was the interviewer, so I talked to people. So we as a group set out to document as much as we could. We'd go out every summer for a month, and it was 10 years of work. So what did we find out? I'm actually going to do the next thing on the next slide. Next slide, please. I've got to tell you that there's something called vernacular religion, which we may or may not go into today. But prairie conditions massively affect religious practice. That is a road. I was driving down this road and I'm going, because obviously there's this huge hole in this road and I think I had students in the car. So I panic all the more because I'm responsible for other people. This means that, and because the population is fairly sparse, this means that usually one priest serves 12, if not more, churches. The sort of Easter celebration that you would experience in an urban church it's just out of the question on the prairies, and the same for Provody. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. So, okay, one of the things, again, the first time I heard this, you do what? If the priest who's got 12 churches wants to do at least something in every church that he serves, he starts on Saturday morning and then goes through Easter at night. you know, because on top of doing at least a bit of a service, he has to drive huge distances from one church to the next. In an urban church like the one where I am in Waterloo, you walk around the church. If you're in the prairies, you can forget walking around the church. A, snow, B, mud. In the church, I don't know if you know this because our church is not exactly, doesn't really follow things strictly. But you're not supposed to bring your Easter basket into the church. And the reason is that it's got ham, kielbasa, or some sort of meat in it. And that is, if you're being really strict, that's a no-no. Because there should be no blood, like the blood in meat, in church other than the blood of Christ. But on the prairies, what are you going to do? So they usually bring the Easter baskets indoors, put them at the end of each row of pews, and bless them there. They do celebrate Palm or Pussy Willow Sunday. They use pussy willows, and they do remember Neyabu Verbabia Zatishtin Valiktin. Next slide, please. Okay, so Oksana asked me to talk about pysanky. The kind of pysanky you think about have, and I think more than just on the prairies, they have come to represent Ukraine more than they are associated with Easter. And probably one of the reasons for this is that maybe the Vegreville Pysanka. Well, all of you know about the Vegreville Pysanka? It's this huge thing. That little spot on the bottom is me. So that little figure standing under the Pysanka is me. And why was the Vegreville Pysanka dedicated? To celebrate the 100th anniversary of the RCMP. What does the RCMP have to do with, Easter? Not a whole lot. What does it have to do with Ukrainians? Well, it's a very important Canadian institution. So what the Ukrainians wanted and lobbied very hard for was to have the thing that celebrates the RCMP be a Ukrainian item. And here it is. It is the Vegreville Pysanka. It's huge, by the way. It rotates in the wind. Next slide, please. The kind of pysanky like Shirley Korpatnitsky and Insinger make are beautiful. They're fantastic. She has a lathe. She has an electric kiska. She has this and that. And she told me that her two daughters put themselves through the University of Saskatchewan by selling pysanky. A lot of their pysanky are more aimed at Anglos than the Ukrainian customers. Next slide, please. Shirley Korpatnitsky kept her grandmother's kiski, wax, etc. And this gives me a chance to say just a tiny bit about the history of dyeing eggs on the prairies. Early ones were like the ones in Ukraine, the ones that people told me about when I did work in Ukraine. Onion skin, beets, and other natural food dyes. You could make you could get a single egg, a colored egg, a krashenka. You could get a design by strapping leaves or whatever onto the pysanka and then boiling it in the onion skin dye. With time, I don't know who discovered it, but somebody did. But if you sew crepe paper, you get a pretty good dye. So the next step is crepe paper dye. And I'm sorry, I didn't, it's crepe paper dye. The pisachki that are on Shirley Korpatnitsky's table, what they did was they took the metal thing that you used to hang calendars and they'd bend it to make the pisachok. The crepe paper dyes and the pysanky are the beginning of something fancier. These days, of course, you use commercial dyes and commercial tools. My favorite is a story about an 86-year-old woman in a place called Theodore. Pani дуже гарні писанки be. You're so beautiful. Where do you get these designs? I wish I had you alive so I could ask you, but to my shock, she says, z internetu. So this 86-year-old woman looks this stuff up online and comes up with these fantastic pysanky. Next slide, please. Now, not only is there modification in terms of, using electric pisachki, where you plug it in and you have different, a small tip, a medium tip, a large tip, etc. But I met Mr. Vasilishin, actually in a church in Saskatchewan, and the Vasilishin family started to do something that has become, I don't like it, but other people love it. It's called the pysanky mosaic. What you do is you take pysanky, break them into little pieces or not so little pieces, and then you assemble them to make a design. And that's what you see on the left. Some of these are bought and donated to churches. This is not a Ukrainian Easter tradition. Neither is the making of mosaics something that people do for Easter. They do it. It's artistic expression. Churches do buy them. It's interesting that the relationship between the church and Easter eggs and modified Easter egg objects is, shall we say, tenuous. In commercial places like Edmonton, they would have pisanka bingo, but they wouldn't do that on the prairies. Next slide, please. So, I don't know how many of these I could show you. I'm just showing one. They're gorgeous. I make them. Mine are not that gorgeous. And the people make them. I don't do it year round, but other people do. I've seen snowflake pysanky for Christmas. And some people will do that. Next slide, please. What I was trying to do with this, and we couldn't get the video to work, but we'll show it to you at the end. Museum on Hunchara. I'll have the other kind of cough drop, please. Museum on Hunchara did pysanky by region. And what I want to get across with this is that traditional pysanky are not these elaborate things. A lot of them, as you'll see at the end, are just lines. So they truly are written on the egg. Of course, if they're well done, they're beautiful, but they are not fancy, and artistry is not the point. Next slide, please. Okay, what do Ukrainians do themselves? For the Easter basket, you make krashenki, which is a single colored egg. So very simple. They go into the Easter basket, get blessed on church, and eaten on Easter morning. Some people use plain hard-boiled eggs, like no color. Next slide, please. Now, more than the stuff that you get from church, you eat. And a big part of eating the church, the food blessed in church, is family unity. And this is me with Patsiona. They do one egg in their Easter basket. Then her husband splits it to make sure everybody gets a piece, which was quite difficult, she said, one year when they had 16 family members there for Easter. Yeah, I can't seem splitting an egg into 16 pieces, but be that as it may. I'll talk about the importance of family more later. Next slide, please. The pasta goes in the Easter basket, circular and fairly flat. This was made by the church women in Prince Albert. Like the eggs, they can include plant, leaf and other plant motifs. On the prairies, many people make them at home, although churches like the one in St. Albert will make them and then you buy them at the church and put them in your basket. Next slide, please. This, if you want to make it at home, this is Nadia Zinser in Edmonton teaching people how to make paska. Next slide, please. Easter basket content. The pasta. There's also something called the babka or the baba. I'll talk more about that in a minute. You put in the eggs, the krashanki, and at least one pysanka. You put in butter or cheese. If you can, you make a buttered lamb. There are molds sold for making buttered lamb. Elaine Nitschik, one of the people I became friends with, said that she was trying to make one by hand. She's working on making one. You do put in ham or kielbasa or both, horseradish, salt, rushnik, and a candle. Next slide. This is the baba or babka. Unlike the paska, they're tall. The one on the right is mine. In the prairies, you very often don't put icing on them, number one. Number two, they are also part of this family unity idea. As in the slide on the right is Eva, my companion, with Florence Bozansky. And Florence Bozansky is quite petite. But she makes a babka or a baba for every member of her family. And one of the little kids said, "Oh, look, my little baba made me a little baba," which I thought was very cute. So all of the kids get one. Next slide, please. Oh, the second half of this presentation is going to be about family and the importance of family, particularly to Ukrainian Canadians, especially the ones on the prairies. I was in Bruderheim, which is a place outside of Alberta, talking to David Bushminski, who's in this picture. And the emphasis I want here is that immigration disrupts family, making family unity especially important. So, you'll see what's coming, of course, with the Provody. With David Bushminski, I'm talking to David Bushminski in the cemetery out in Bruderheim. And I was asking him about the designs in glass on the concrete slabs put on graves. And he said, "But do you know why they put concrete slabs on graves?" And I said, "No." And he said, "That's so our ancestors don't get up and try to go back to Ukraine." So for farmers especially, establishing their family roots, their family seeds, however you want to put it, in Canadian soil is particularly important. Next slide. Okay, back to the Easter basket. I said that there have to be blessed items, the things in the Easter basket get blessed. In this picture is a rushnik from an Easter basket and a candle in the middle. Because these are blessed items, you do not throw them in the trash can, as you probably know. what you do with blessed pussy willows, and my husband has done this, is you can use them to avoid storms and tornadoes. I have a lovely thing in the book that I mentioned at the very beginning about, and I never seen tornadoes until I was on the prairies, but you can see these things coming, they're twisted. And this one woman sees it coming and she says, aha. So she runs around the house with a pussy willow. Storm goes away. So you have to, they're kept in the house. With pussy willows, you burn them at the end of the year. Eggshells, they can be buried in the garden, especially under food crops. The ideas and people then consume the blessing. They can be thrown in running, and it has to be running water because then it gets taken to the other world. Interestingly, the candle and the rushnik can also be used for weather control. So you see a storm coming, light the candle, put it in a window in the direction from which the storm is coming. Or you put your rushnik there. Next slide, please. So you asked me for Provody. Forget Provody. About the only place that they do it is in a place near Edmonton, which is where that picture's from, which is near a major population center. The idea behind Provody is that it's supposed to take the blessing and the joyous news of Easter, the joy of Christ's resurrection, and bring it to one's dead relatives in the grave. You're supposed to leave Easter eggs, other food, etc. Having a meal at gravesite is very common, if you can, but I'll show you why you can't. And anyway, the idea is then you're sharing food with the ancestors and honoring the dead. For people on the prairies, the idea of going out, you just can't do it. You can't do Provody. Keep going. Next slide. So what people do, because graves and the ancestors in the graves are very important, as I've already said, you still bless the graves. You still go out to the graves, but you don't do it a Provody. You use them in connection with Chram or Praznik. Now, Chram and Praznik are church celebrations in honor of the saint or holiday after whom or after which the church is named. Most are, deliberately, scheduled in the summer to make them accessible. That's Hafford. Next slide, please. This is, so that one was a Catholic church. No, I'm sorry, they're both Orthodox, my mistake. This is in Sturgis, Saskatchewan, Holy Trinity, or Trinity Summer. And I just wanted to put one in first because the picture that's on the cover of my book was taken in Sturgis. And second, the altar boy in Sturgis is my buddy Roy Collott. Can you see him behind the priest in the photo on the left? Roy Sturgis is my age, so I said, please note the age of the altar boy. Next slide, please. The cemetery in general is incredibly important, as well as religion. I mentioned the Plainview Church. When I first saw it, I almost cried at such a mess. To walk out to that church. So I'm in the picture on the top left, I'm standing in the road. To walk out into that church and get into the inside, and the two pictures on the bottom are pictures of the inside. I should have made them bigger. But there's bird poop everywhere and on and on and on. To get there, I had to walk through a swamp. I had to bend reeds down so I wouldn't sink too deep into the swamp and walk on top of the reeds to get to the church. You walk across the road and there's the Plainview Cemetery and it's immaculate. It's gorgeous. So the cemetery is maintained even when the church can't be. Next slide, please. What I have here is what happens to a lot of churches that close. Actually, the one on the right, upper right, is Prazdnik in Saskatchewan, where you see the priests walking between the graves and blessing graves. The other two is the church cupola. When the church is closed and the church is burnt down, the cupola is kept and it is erected in the cemetery. Next slide, please. So, I hope you got the picture that I had a good time on the prairies. I learned an incredible amount. Traditions on the prairies, I'm assuming like in other rural areas, but certainly I lived in Edmonton, so I went to a church in Edmonton. It was actually a very large church, larger than the one here in Waterloo. But prairie churches and prairie traditions are different from practices elsewhere. They are different from what is done in Ukraine. I've done work in Ukraine. In fact, I'm trying to write a book about practices in Ukraine. But just because they're different doesn't mean they're any less vibrant or any less meaningful. They live and they work because they fit the lived circumstances of the people on the prairies. Next slide. This is a tribute to some of the people who I interviewed and who became like friends. Well, actually, a lot of people did, but these were the people I kept going back to see again and again. One's Roy Collett. He was the altar boy in the Chram in Sturgis. Betty Sake was in Innisfree, and actually so was Chris Zorniak. Betty Sake's son went to our church in Edmonton. Nellie Holobachuk was in Priestville, Saskatchewan, not originally from there. But a big section of the book is about her because she was a real special lady and a real go-getter. And if we have time, I'll tell you the story of Nellie Holobachuk. She grew up in like a nothing town in Saskatchewan, moved to Toronto, first was a model, then she became a hairdresser. By being a hairdresser, she met people who invested in the stock market, and she did too. And she became very wealthy by investing in the stock market. And what she did with her money was that she bought almost life-size statues of all the stations of the cross and put them around the cemetery at her family church in Chekhov, which again is a nothing place. I don't know how many dirt roads I've driven on, but definitely I had to go there. I had to go to that church by driving on dirt roads. Chris Zorniak was the one that told me about programming computers on his tractor, etc. And he was fun. He was incredibly funny. So I had to see him again. Unfortunately, 3 of those people have now passed away. So I think that doing the work that I did with that book and honoring these people, it makes it especially important. And thank you for your attention. That's it.
Thank you so much for this amazing lecture. Now we have video.
I asked Oksana to play this video from Muzey Ivana Hunchara because these show pysanky in various parts of Ukraine. And what I think is important about this is original pysanky as opposed to the one done by Shirley Korpatnitsky and co are very simple. They really are written. They really are like single lines on an egg. with a few exceptions like this and the Hutzel egg, they really are written as opposed to these incredibly ornate things. So I wanted to use this to show that. No, they don't rotate by hay. I know the person in the museum on Guanajuato who did this, and see, they're just lines. There is sound with this, but it's very faint. Thank you.
And next video.
One more. This is in our church in Waterloo. And you know who does a pysanky workshop with hubby and a lot of other nice and supportive people every year. That's my husband. That's me. You don't understand, but what I'm saying is I'm trying to explain the technique, because what's very hard about doing pysanky, unless you've already done them, is that you are not laying a color on an egg. You are preventing, so I'm talking about the pissacha, you are preventing the egg from absorbing dye. And I was telling Peter, I'm walking around helping various people, and this woman has this absolutely thick layer of wax on her egg. And I said, why'd you do that? You're going to have a terrible time getting it off at the end. But it makes the color brighter. No, it does not. It's the dye that makes the color bright. So what the wax does is protects it from the next color. Yeah, see, this guy makes a mistake, then he goes and tries to get it off, and then wonders why the dye doesn't take there. And my husband said, why didn't the dye take? And I said, because it's it's hard for people to understand the principle of dyeing.
Well, there are about 30 people there.
Yeah, Peter says there are about 30 people there. Baptiste, Brian, and Olga were my helpers. And they all know what they're doing. Husband knows what he's doing, and they helped out tremendously. See, so husband says, why didn't it take there? And I say, well, because we actually had fewer accidents at this thing than we did at other pysanky workshop. We've done it. Peter and I have been married for 45 years, and I started doing this before I married Peter. So Peter and I together have done it for 45. And I've done it for longer, the workshops, which gives you the basic principle, and then you can go as fancy as you like. Can you turn the volume up at all or not? Because Misha did a nice job. Well, one of the things about depending on technology is something called technical difficulties. These are two guys who are actually the altar boys at our church. People hard at work.
See the posters on the wall?
Yeah, Peter wanted me to emphasize the posters on the wall. Those things like white, yellow, orange, red, etc. He did those to help guide people through a very simple egg. So while the egg is white, you do the design that's hanging that's on the white pieces of paper. Then while the egg is yellow, you do what's in the yellow. Orange is orange, etc., etc. And one of the reasons that people have to be, Peter has to be the dye master is at one time early in our doing pysanky workshop, we let people dye their own eggs. And some genius, because he doesn't understand the principle of dyeing, gets the egg to this stage where it's black and you need to take the wax off. But instead of taking the wax off, this person says, I want to add yellow chickies. So he takes this black egg and sticks it into the yellow dye, thereby ruining the yellow dye for all the other participants of the workshop. You know, for first time try, a lot of these people did really well. Maybe pysanky writing is in Ukrainian genes, I don't know. Yeah, really pretty good. And yes, I did manage to convince them that you don't hold the egg above the candle, because if you do, you get soot on the egg. Now, I've taught before I retired in 1919. I taught for 45 years, and I know that just because you say it doesn't mean people will do it. So, you know, you work at it. Some of these are really pretty good. They're really nice. Just a couple more. See, I am proud of my egg. Yes. Now, we earned at the workshop, we earned $500. And the church supports military aid to Ukraine. So the $500, well, some of it was for attending the workshop, and some of it was because I was selling my own pysanky. And, you know, it goes to medical aid in Ukraine. So thank you.